Hello friends, I'm Konrad and welcome to Bad Guy Breakdowns, the series where we look at the most iconic villains to grace the silver screen. Let's get into the villainy.
You know how this is gonna turn out, don't you?
Nope.
I think you do.
By the time the Coen brothers had started thinking about adapting Cormac McCarthy's novel No Country for Old Men as their 12th movie, they had already dabbled in nihilism. That is to say, a rejection of any grandiose moral or ethical code. Things, often bad ones, just arbitrarily happen sometimes in their movies, as they do in life. And it's how characters respond to these random acts of chance that matters. Normally this was played for humour. The gang of nihilists in The Big Lebowski are a running joke throughout the movie, and end up not actually being nihilists at all when it becomes inconvenient for them.
We thought we'd been getting $1 million!
It's not fair!
There? Who's the fucking nihilist around here, you bunch of fucking crybabies?
But in No Country for Old Men, while there is still humour, the character of Anton Chigurh feels like their most earnest attempt to realise a force of pure chance and chaos. His supposed principles, violent and insane though they may be, are supported by the themes of the story he is a part of. It's what makes this such a good movie, one of my favourites from the Coens, and what makes Chigurh such a captivating villain. But it's important to remember that this was coming during a creative dry spell for the sibling directors. Intolerable Cruelty in 2003 and their remake of The Lady Killers in 2004 had been both commercially and critically disappointing. And yet what they'd end up creating with this adaptation is one of their most popular and enduring movies. I think Javier Bardem's performance as Chigurh is a big part of that. The Spanish actor had been in movies for the best part of 20 years by the time auditions began, but this was the role that was going to announce him as a household name, and the Coens knew that he was perfect for it, despite him telling them that he hated violence, couldn't drive, wasn't comfortable speaking English, and had never fired a gun, which is... let me just check my notes here. Yep, that's literally all Anton Chigurh does in this movie. And they almost didn't get him for it, just to make the fact that it worked at all a little more surprising. British actor Mark Strong revealed in an interview with Total Film that he had been called and placed on standby for the role because Bardem was having scheduling issues. Nothing ever came of that, though it's fascinating to think of what the character would have been like if it had been Strong in the role instead of Bardem. One of the things that drew the Coens to this novel is the vivid sense of place it creates. And Bardem's Chigurh was deliberately conceived to stand in opposition to that sense of place. While the characters and environments of West Texas are recreated in minute detail, including consulting Texan native Tommy Lee Jones on aspects of the script, Chigurh is designed to feel different, from his name up, like a man out of place, or rather, a man with no place, of ambiguous origins, but definitively not from here. Whether you interpret that here to mean Texas, or maybe something a little more, let's say spiritual, is up for debate, but understanding that Anton Chigurh is fundamentally intended to feel as unidentifiable to the viewer as possible is key to appreciating him as a character. And as his character distinguishes himself from those around him through his cold approach to death, so too does the adaptation distinguish itself from the genre tropes that it plays with. No Country for Old Men is at once a western, a thriller, a comedy, and yet chooses to deliberately upend the tropes of those genres. This is another aspect of the novel that the Coens found so appealing. The way it plays in genre spaces with exciting shootouts and tense procedural sequences like Chigurh blowing up a car's petrol tank, while never losing sight of that sense of nihilism that they found so fascinating. The three main characters here, Llewellyn Moss, the charming blue-collar lead, Ed Tom Bell, the world-weary sheriff, and Anton Chigurh, the terrifying hunter, all fit pretty neatly into genre stereotypes. And yet, when we examine the plot a little later, we'll see that they never even meet each other and, without giving too much away, don't really have a big final confrontation. And that's the subversion of the genre tropes that the Coens were after. The end result can sometimes leave audiences a bit unsatisfied. There's this enormous build-up of tension in No Country for Old Men that sort of just dissipates as the characters each encounter their own instances of dumb luck, for better or worse. This is, after all, a western that deliberately doesn't show you the big gunfight at the end, and that comes with a sense of narrative whiplash. The Coens told the Guardian newspaper in 2007 that they knew just by setting the movie in Texas, they would evoke imagery of the great western directors of the past. In their own words, hard men in the Southwest shooting at each other, that's definitely Sam Peckinpah's thing. So it's a credit to their skill as writers and directors that they were able to at once pay homage to those who came before them with their nods to the genre trappings of the Western and still distance themselves from their work to create something distinct, and no aspect of this movie is more distinct than its villain. Bardem won an Oscar for his performance in No Country for Old Men, and it's pretty obvious why, but he's distinct in that he's a character defined as much by what we don't know about him as what we do. And to me, that mystery is what makes him so interesting. Like the tiny space between the fingers of man and God on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in which sits all of creation, Chigurh is a void of unknowable chaos, and to come close to him is to gaze into the abyss.
What's this guy supposed to be, the ultimate badass?
No, I don't think that's how I'd describe him.
How would you describe him?
I guess I'd say he doesn't have a sense of humor.
The single best thing about Anton Chigurh is the number of levels he can be appreciated on, and he's so central to No Country for Old Men that any praise of the multifacetedness of his character can also be applied to the movie as a whole. He works as a straight-up villain. You can ignore the symbolism, the themes he exists to support, and just view him as a murderous psychopath who cannot be stopped, like a Spanish Terminator.
Hasta la vista, baby.
In designing his costume and look, it was decided that he needed to appear distinct from your average West Texan to make him stand out as much as possible. Where they would wear straw hats in summer, he wears no hat at all. Where they would wear functional clothing, he has a stylish wide collar, a fashionable denim jacket, alligator boots, and, in the words of costume designer Mary Zofres,
he's got like one of those groovier belts. It's not a Western belt.
Also, listen, I can already hear people making fun of me for describing clothing from the 80s when this movie is set as fashionable, but I defy anyone to look at Chigurh rocking that bowl cut and not come to the conclusion that this is a style icon. He looks, well,
Groovy.
See, Ash thinks so too, and he knows a thing or two about denim. Anyway, the point I'm making is that appearance and the general way Chigurh carries himself makes the character striking on even the most superficial of levels. We don't know where exactly he's from, and the fact that he could have been played by either a Spanish or a British actor implies that the origins of the character are explicitly mysterious. We don't really know anything about him, but he's terrifyingly competent. He seems to produce guns and equipment like the cattle bolt gun and the silenced shotgun out of thin air, evoking a John Wick-like network of safe houses and armories available to him, and knows how to do everything from blowing up car gas tanks to performing field surgery on himself. There is no challenge that he faces that he isn't equal to, and that makes him seem like an unrelenting force of evil that Moss has absolutely no chance of resisting. And that's where he gets interesting, because Chigurh isn't just the sum total of his appearance, performance and skill set, impressive though those aspects may be. This is where we're going to get into the labyrinthine territory of video essays the internet over. Theming.
I reckon I'll go out the way I come in.
So, what are the themes of No Country for Old Men? Well, we've already talked about the Coen brothers' burgeoning interest in nihilism and moral ambiguity at the time of making it, and unsurprisingly, they play a big part in the themes of the movie.
Who's the fucking nihilist around here, you bunch of fucking crybabies?
The most obvious way that these themes manifest themselves is in the main character. At first, one might be forgiven for assuming it's Llewellyn Moss. Certainly, his actions are a focus for a long time. But I think the actual protagonist of No Country for Old Men is Tommy Lee Jones's grizzled sheriff Ed Tom Bell. Or, at the very least, if he's not the character who propels the story forward, then he's certainly the character whose own point of view mirrors that of the audience. We don't really understand the forces in play in this movie, who they are, who's working for who. Even Moss is a character we barely know, something that becomes strikingly obvious at the end of the movie. And Ed Tom is our surrogate. We've talked a bit about the genre of this movie, but one that I deliberately didn't mention was film noir, a genre that the Coens usually have at least one foot in. And one of the most defining features of noir is a story that unfolds for both the audience and the main character, usually a detective or private eye of some kind, at the same time. I think it's fairly clear from this description that No Country for Old Men has elements of noir, and that our lead detective is Ed Tom. But how does all of this link back to the themes of the movie? Well, if we accept that Ed Tom is our analogue, then the story becomes one of an old cop who views himself as a force for order in the world, pursuing two individuals who cut a swathe of chaos through West Texas. The question he always seems to be on the verge of asking is, why did any of this happen? And the great irony, and where the Coens wisely depart from noir tropes, is that we know there isn't a reason. A man was hunting and found a briefcase, and now dozens of people are dead. Such an horrific string of events resting on the pure dumb luck of Llewellyn Moss only wounding an antelope is the movie's nihilistic theme distilled down to its purest form. And while Ed Tom guides the audience through the physical manifestations of that theme in the world the Coens created, Anton stands as its avatar, the representative of chaos on Earth.
And in the dream I knew that he was going on ahead. He's fixing to make a fire somewhere out there in all that dark and all that cold.
Chigurh is at once one of the most principled and most alien characters in this entire movie. He doesn't believe in morality or ethics or fairness or any kind of higher power beyond absolute chance. And we'll see as the movie progresses how his interactions with the random people he meets are as defined by chance as any other factor. Whether it be deciding a man's life on a coin toss, killing someone simply for being in his way, or letting someone live when shooting them might have been easier, he is completely unknowable. But one gets the sense that somehow he is at least fair. And I think that is what makes him so fascinating, because he perfectly encapsulates the theme of the movie he exists in. He defies categorization and understanding, he simply is. And that makes him terrifying because fate is a cosmic force that none of us have any control over. And the idea that we are all headed for a destiny that we can't see, let alone avoid, is fundamentally upsetting to humans who typically try to apply meaning to their lives.
You think this boy Moss has got any notion of the sorts of sons of bitches that are hunting him?
I don't know, he ought to. He's seen the same things I've seen, and it certainly made an impression on me.
The movie opens with a monologue from Ed Tom Bell about the sheriffs in the old days, regaled to us like someone might tell stories about Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, like myths, essentially. And the purpose of this elegiac prose is to capture a sense that things were better in the old days, or at least made more sense. To that end, we meet two people in the first scene that are crucial to the rest of the film. The legendary Roger Deakins and his stunning landscape photography, which further emphasises the sense of a vast and unforgiving world, and our boy Anton, who is in the process of being arrested for something. And here as well, Deakins' photography is used to brilliant effect to draw attention to the character, framing him in such a way as to hide his face until he violently pushes himself to the forefront of both the shot and the story as he kills a sheriff's deputy.
Yes, sir. I got it under control.
This is the first clear view we see of his face. And if this doesn't tell you everything you need to know about the character, then I don't know what to say. He washes his hands, bandages his wrists, grabs his Castle bolt gun, and then uses it moments later to steal the car of a man who is, frankly, way too trusting of cops. Not to mention men stepping out of police cars who clearly are not cops.
Howdy. What's this about?
It's about you getting murdered, you fool! And this is as good a time as any to draw attention to Chigurh's choice of weapon. It's brilliantly concealed within the story as a believably practical tool for breaking and entering as well as killing, but its presence is absolutely symbolic of Chigurh's relationship with other people as well. They are literally cattle to him, and his indiscriminate slaughter of them with this tool is coldly industrial. And yet somehow it's hard to escape the perverse idea that he himself probably views it as a humane method of murder. Above all else, these two scenes establish the fundamentals of his character better than dialogue ever could. He will kill anyone who gets in his way, and it makes every subsequent scene where he interacts with another person unbearably tense. We catch up with Anton a little later after Llewellyn Moss has made the life-altering decision, though not for the reasons he probably anticipated, to steal the money from a cartel drug deal gone wrong. And the scene where the villain reappears is at once completely disconnected from the rest of the plot, and yet also somehow one of the best scenes in the entire movie. In fact, that's true of quite a lot of scenes Chigurh is in. Every indication suggests that he is quite happy to pay for his gas and his little bag of peanuts and move on to wherever he is headed until the shopkeeper has the temerity to notice that he is driven down from the direction of Dallas.
Y'all getting any rain up your way?
What way would that be?
I seen you was from Dallas.
Being recognised, as it turns out, is a big deal for Chigurh, and what follows is a wonderful dialogue between him and the man behind the till.
What business is it of yours? Where I'm from? Friendo.
And it's not just the icy back and forth that makes this so memorable, it's Chigurh seemingly reveling in tormenting this man, pointing out all of the holes in his logic and making thinly veiled threats. One might, quite rightly, assume that he is going to kill this shopkeeper for implying that he might be able to pass useful information to the police. And then, in a surprising shift, he lets the man's life hang on a coin toss.
Call it.
Call it, yes. For what?
Just call it.
But the really important bit of dialogue is to follow as we get our first big chunk of fatalistic musing.
It's been traveling 22 years to get here, and now it's here. And it's either heads or tails.
This man's life is reduced to the outcome of a coin toss that, according to Chigurh, was destined to occur at this exact moment. Because, like the coin, he has been travelling to arrive at this very place and time. And there is a sense of fairness to this. He has a better shot at winning his life back than many other people the villain meets in this movie. Although in adopting this seemingly principled stance here, it only serves to highlight the lack of principles elsewhere. So if he does have principles, and several people in No Country for Old Men assert that he does, then they are so alien as to be worthless to other humans. Was there some test this man passed that the other two victims thus far did not? We'll never know. But there's only one other person in this movie who he'll offer a coin toss to, and that alone is significant. In this instance, the shopkeeper lives, is congratulated, and Chigurh goes on about his business in a disarmingly friendly manner. For whatever else he may be, he demonstrates he is not a liar and keeps his promise. Anton is brought to the site of the cartel shootout a little later by two men who work for Stephen Root's unnamed businessman and is given a tracking device for the money. He then shoots both of them, which is confusing and calls into question who exactly Chigurh is working for in this movie, though if you're paying attention to the thematic through line here, the answer that he's working for himself with the goal of achieving whatever is set in front of him should be self-evident. Either way, more bodies for that pile in the desert.
Well, it's a mess, ain't it, Sheriff?
If it ain't, it'll do till the mess gets here.
And, crucially, Anton is now on the trail of Llewellyn Moss. First stop, his trailer, where he gives us the surest sign yet that he is pure evil personified when he drinks milk straight from the bottle. Before being thwarted by a particularly obstinate receptionist who refuses to give him the address of Llewellyn's work.
Where does he work?
Did you not hear me? We can't give out no information.
Why does he let this woman live? Truly, Chigurh moves in mysterious ways. Llewellyn, meanwhile, has bought rooms at count 'em, two motels to see if anyone is following him. Stashed the money and found out that the Mexicans are in fact on his tail. All the while Chigurh is busy shooting at crows for some reason. In fairness, I'd need to blow off some steam after dealing with that trailer park lady too, although I'd probably play a video game or something. To each his own, we're not here to judge. Moss goes back to his original motel armed with a shitload of tent poles and uses them to get the money out of the air vents from a different room this time, and unfortunately for the Mexican cartel members in his first room, this is exactly the moment where Chigurh gets a response on the tracking device. Turns out driving around the city shooting at birds actually was a good idea after all. This is one of a couple of great action thriller scenes in this movie as Moss rushes to hook the briefcase with the money in it through the vents while Chigurh closes in, complete with a great pullback and reveal when he breaches a motel room only to reveal that it's the original room, now full of Mexican gangsters. It's also important for further solidifying audience understanding of Chigurh as a villain. We've seen him kill 2 soldiers from the corporate side of this drug deal, people who seemingly hired him, and now we've seen him kill 3 from the Mexican side. It fully establishes that he's working for himself. He's essentially an uncontrollable force who, once unleashed, will pursue his goal to the ends of the earth. And it makes Moss's task seem impossible. But by this point in the story, it's not just Moss who is under threat from Chigurh. Other, more significant forces are beginning to worry.
Just how dangerous is he?
Compared to what? The bubonic plague?
Moss and Chigurh trade wounds in another phenomenal action scene at another hotel a few days later after the tracking device is discovered in the money, with 2 more innocents ending up dead as a result of their rampage. How they respond to their injuries is telling. Chigurh blows up a car in order to rob a pharmacy before performing field surgery on himself in a great sequence of procedural scenes that demonstrate his vast array of competencies. Moss passes out in Mexico and is woken up by a mariachi band who presumably take him to a hospital, where he meets Carson Wells, a man who has cockily assured everyone he has met that he knows Chigurh well enough to catch him and kill him.
You don't understand. You can't make a deal with him. Even if you gave him the money back, he'd still kill you just for inconveniencing him.
But guess who else is going to meet Carson Wells pretty soon? If you answered Anton Chigurh later that day at his hotel, then you're correct. Good job! I love this scene because of how quickly Wells abandons any sense of bravado or confidence. He is literally 2 scenes removed from telling Moss that he cannot cut a deal with Chigurh, and yet here he is trying to do the same thing himself.
I could just go home.
You could.
Make it worth your while. Take you to an ATM. There's 14 grand in it.
Unsurprisingly, it doesn't end well. There's one moment of physical acting here that is incredibly important for later, where Wells's blood almost reaches Anton's feet before he lifts them up onto the coffee table. We've actually seen it before too, when he removes his bloodstained socks after killing the cartel members at the motel. And it tells us what we already know, that Chigurh is incredibly attentive to any traces he might leave, particularly footprints. But it will come back just one more time, and the phone call with Moss after Wells has been killed should give you some hint as to when that might be, because it's the first time Chigurh has mentioned Carla Jean, Llewellyn's wife. If one thing is clear from everything the villain has done so far in this movie, it's that Carson Wells was at least partially right. He will kill people just for inconveniencing him. Stephen Root's unnamed businessman/drug dealer eats it next before Chigurh asks a random accountant in the room a question that is puzzling.
Do you see me?
It's another instance of Anton's bizarre principles coming to the forefront of the movie. Why would he not just kill this man? And the answer, I think, is once again that he is guided by notions beyond human understanding. And the mysterious nature of those notions is only compounded by the Coen's choice to end the scene before we see what happens, allowing our imaginations to fill in the blanks. Did he flip a coin for the accountant like the shopkeeper? Did he just leave like he did with the receptionist at the trailer park? Or did the accountant end up dead? It's for us to decide, and the fact that any one of these 3 options could be accurate makes Chigurh's methods all the more confounding. Especially since he seemingly murders a man who was helping him with jumper cables for his truck a little while later.
Can you get those chicken grates out of the bed?
What are you talking about?
The connective tissue between these deaths is usually that the people involved have inconvenienced him in some way, even if just by owning a car that he needs to take. But this latest death always strikes me as particularly cruel because of how helpful the man was to him. And yet, it won't be the cruelest.
He's a peculiar man. You might even say he has principles that transcend money or drugs or anything like that. He's not like you. Yeah, he's not even like me.
This is normally where I discuss the big final confrontation between the hero and the villain of the piece, but No Country for Old Men isn't that kind of movie. As I've said before, Llewellyn Moss isn't really the hero, and even if he were, the last time he and Anton Chigurh even see each other, alive, is halfway through the film. In fact, so detached is the final chapter from traditional action movie narrative that it isn't even Chigurh who finds Moss's body after he's been killed off screen by cartel members, while potentially cheating on his wife. It's a scene designed to completely undercut everything the audience thinks it knows about this handsome, roguishly charming war veteran who we've been rooting for. He's been competent enough to go toe-to-toe with the villain every time they've met. And now he's been ignominiously gunned down by anonymous henchmen because his mother-in-law gave away where he would be staying. And despite everything we've seen up until this point indicating that Moss loves his wife, here he is considering infidelity moments before his death. And when we reflect on Carla Jean's place in this narrative, it's hard not to build a picture of a woman who, despite her husband's protests to the contrary, was placed in needless danger by him. Let's not forget, Chigurh gave Moss an out when they spoke on the phone. He offered to spare her if Moss gave himself up, but his pride forced him to refuse. And that ultimately led to the final death of this movie, Carla Jean's.
I buried my mother today. Ain't paid for that neither.
I wouldn't worry about it.
She is confronted by Chigurh sometime later and offered the same coin toss as the shopkeeper. Yet she, like Ed Tom Bell, refuses to engage in his game because she doesn't understand it.
I ain't gonna call it.
Her final words to Chigurh ring true to me. The coin doesn't have any say, it's just him. His principles are inconsistent and unknowable to the point where you question whether they even exist, and Anton seems genuinely stunned by her refusal to engage with him, though not enough to change course. And him briefly checking his boots as he exits her house is the only confirmation we get that she has been killed. People die seemingly indiscriminately in No Country for Old Men, but Carla Jean is one of the hardest to take. And likewise, Ed Tom Bell resigning himself to a sort of death as he retires from his position as a keeper of order because he no longer understands the world he wants to protect hits like a truck at the end of the movie. Both of these two characters' fates serve as a coin toss of sorts, one where Bell returns to the scene of Moss's murder suspecting he will find Chigurh, but doesn't, and the murder of Carla Jean. All that kept Bell alive and saw Carla Jean killed was chance. So we return to the theming of the whole movie. The Coen brothers' nihilistic approach to storytelling is never clearer than in the death of Moss. Our supposed hero gets the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern treatment, and we're left with one moral character dead and another alive but irrelevant for no reason other than luck. Even Chigurh himself seems to be a victim of this as he gets into a random car accident, fleeing the scene alive. But there is a sort of moral message to this, hidden within the brutally pragmatic worldview that the directors have created. That the end of a life is often abrupt and meaningless, and it's what you do leading up to it that counts. Or at least that's my takeaway. Call me an optimist. And that's No Country for Old Men. It won a ton of Oscars, announced Javier Bardem as a major name in Hollywood, and remains one of the most effective blends of genres in recent memory. And Anton Chigurh, the agent of chaos and violence, rightfully took his place as one of the all-time greats in it. Thank you for joining us on Bad Guy Breakdowns. If you could leave a like, that'd be much appreciated, and be sure to stick around for the next one. Until then, I've been Konrad, and I'll see you next time.